So what I think is important to understand, I don't know if anybody's seen the headlines, we actually were able to trace back where HIV originally came from, and it actually comes from the simian immunodeficiency virus, which IV stands for immunodeficiency virus. So that's sort of the biological trace back. There's also, I don't know, a lot of people don't know that there's different types of HIV. So there's HIV-1, which is very, very common, and that's basically what we're talking about today and what we're preventing. And then there's HIV-2, which is very, very rare, especially within the United States. I think there's only 162 cases in total out of 320 million people, so just to know how rare it is. And primarily it's found in Western Africa. So it's also a lot harder to contract than HIV-1. It's a lot harder for it to stay alive within the body. So there's a lot we know about it. So let's keep focusing on HIV-1 because that's the main focus. Then also within HIV-1, there's numerous subtypes, and you know, there's 9 major subtypes. And there's one drug that sort of handles all of them pretty damn well, and that's Truvada, which is what we're going to talk about today. The first case of HIV was traced back to 1959. That's the first person that was sort of that was immediately found to have been somebody that had HIV. And then in 1981, Nick Rock was the first person to die of AIDS in New York City. And that's sort of when the gay community came together and we were like, wait a minute, what's going on? And I think what happened 35 years ago is we all sort of came together and we sat together and we said, there's something going through our community and we need to talk about it, and nobody wants to talk about it. Reagan went on TV and said, abstinence, you guys don't reproduce, just don't fuck. Sorry. F***. So, and then, you know, we fought on, and we got really loud, and we got aggressive because we were on the fence. We wanted to defend ourselves, we wanted to defend our community. And I think that's because the gay community and the LGBTQ community in general was very, very active during that period. I think what happened is that that's why HIV got so heavily associated with us too, because we were the loud voices talking about it. And I'm so grateful to see young people here, and to see straight people here, and like literally everybody, because as said before, this concerns everybody. So let's not be really boring, so I'm going to do this really fast. There's 1.2 million people within the United States that live with HIV. As we already heard, there's 50,000 new infections of HIV every year in the United States, and there's 180,000 people in the United States that do not even know that they have HIV. And that is because testing is not one of the most common things. If everybody wants to close their eyes and raise their hands, who gets tested every 3 months? Good. Who's from now on going to get tested every 3 months? Okay, that's 2 people more. More hands! Who in this room has been sexually active in the last 6 months? Everybody who has their hands up? You know what you do every 3 months from now on? And we'll talk about this because there's a lot of fear and stuff like this going wrong with it. So anyway, so within the state of California, there's 7,000 new infections a year. So out of 50,000 in all of the United States, there's 7,000 in our state. And 75.7% of those are men who have sex with men. Medically, we call that men who have sex with men because not every man that has sex with men wants to be associated as being gay. So they're men who have sex with men. And there's different communities where being gay or being LGBTQ is handled differently, and that's all part of this conversation. And that's why it's so utterly important that we talk about this very, very openly and that we keep an open mind. Who knows how HIV is transmitted?
Bodily fluids.
That's great. There's many. Which one?
Blood.
Blood's one. What else?
Semen.
Why did that come so fast? Get it? When I turned around. It came from a lesbian. Okay, we gotta talk. What's the lady equivalent of semen? Vaginal fluids. And what does the female chest produce that the male chest doesn't produce?
Breast milk.
You're good. Okay. And then basically, any bodily fluid that contains this could carry HIV as well. Okay. What are the acts in which you may get exposed?
Bottoming.
Bottoming? Not the other way around? So, unprotected sex, and we'll talk about what unprotected means, I think. Okay, what else?
Needles.
What?
Needles.
Needles.
Needles, yes. What else? What does the child do on the mommy? Yes, that one. Occupational exposure. So there's people that can be exposed during occupational, things. So those are sort of the main areas where this comes from, right?
Right.
Has anybody ever been associated with any of this?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, cool. So it's good to know about them. Now, what I'm going to do really quickly is I'm going to quickly talk about how HIV works in the body, or how it actually reproduces. Okay, this is a CD4 T helper cell. Actually, if I add this in it, which is its little core, that contains its DNA. So the DNA is what our body needs to reproduce, right? So that's our sort of genetic code. So everybody in this room has a different DNA. However, what HIV is it's a virus. So the virus needs to reproduce in the body, and the retrovirus does this a little different than anybody else. So let's assume there's this little virus cell that comes into the body, and usually when an infection happens, that's not just one cell, it's not 50 cells. The lowest possible infection that has ever occurred was with 362 cells in a milliliter of blood. So just to give you an idea of how this works. So basically, this little cell comes in, and it has little receptors on it. It looks a little bit like a sun right now, don't laugh. And then the CD4 helper cell has little harbors, basically, or receptors. And what HIV does, it goes to those receptors and then docks on the CD4 T helper cell, thinks, got you. I'm going to take care of you and kick you out of the body. But what the virus does is it actually goes inside of the cell in order to reproduce. So there's 4 big steps that basically happen. So there is something called fusion. Then in here, when the cell has sort of been in there and has sort of opened up, there's something called reverse transcriptase. And then there's something called integrase, which happens in there, which needs to happen in order for so basically the DNA opens up, the RNA which is a single strand of DNA, from the virus cell, goes to the DNA, copies itself, makes copies of the virus, and then basically puts it out, and there's another enzyme that's called protease. And then the virus cell goes out, there's a lot more, and then the virus sort of replicates in the CD4 T helper cell dies. When we talk about prevention, so there's a certain risk associated. Risk always sounds bad immediately. So the reality of life is everything has a sort of risk. If I walk across the street and I don't check for the bus might hit me, so that's a risk. How high or low that risk is sort of determines on what I need to do in order to reduce that risk so I don't get hit by the bus, which we learned. So we look left and we look right. In other countries we look right and then we look left, and then we don't get hit by the bus. And then, ta-da, we all survive. So what we're trying to do is, obviously there's many different ways. I can also just not cross the street. That's another prevention option. So when it comes to STIs and HIV, there's numerous ways of avoiding potential infections. What's the easiest one that Reagan mentioned in 1981? Is that really the easiest one? No, it's not. So abstinence is one of them. Then there is something called zero sorting, which means I only have sex or intimate relationships with someone that has the same HIV status as I do. That works for some people it doesn't work. Regular testing every 1 to 3 months. I sometimes get tested every month because sometimes I'm more sexually active and sometimes less. But regular testing is a prevention option. Knowing your status and knowing your health and knowing what's happening is a prevention in itself. Condoms is one. That's the one that we've been using for 35 years, and I think it's a really good thing. Then there is PrEP, which is post-exposure prophylaxis. So imagine, there's a certain timeline. Over here, I am long before sex. At least rectally 7 days before, vaginally 20 days before, I take PrEP. Now it comes to sex, condomless or with condom, and I am protected. Does that make sense? So that's PrEP, that's over here. Even before that comes testing because I know my status. Then there is one called condoms. That's right before. I slip that thing on, we go, we're done, great, prevention method achieved. Now something happens with that condom, it's post-sex, post-exposure prophylaxis now sets in, and I can potentially take that and I can prevent. Now if everything fails and somehow the virus should infect me, it's not a death sentence anymore nowadays, because we can treat people very, very successfully, and that's called TASP, treatment as prevention. Because this cycle repeats itself. I don't just have sex once. So what we do is, if somebody has HIV, we treat them so damn well that they literally cannot transmit the virus, and that's called TASP. And that's about 96 to 99.86% sure. And then we repeat this from the beginning, however much often we want to do. Okay, so those are the main prevention options, and that's a little bit of the timeline. And I think that the one that we all want to learn about today, which is PrEP,